Clyde Mercer's voice cut through the chapel's still air. "I don't have gold, but I have a daughter." Grace Whitlock froze hymn book pressed to her chest. The man she called father was bargaining her like a sack of grain. And the worst part, the deal was already struck. One handshake, one lie, and she'd be handed to a man whose smile was made for breaking things. That was the moment Grace knew no sermon, no prayer, no heaven above could save her. She'd have to save herself. Follow my story to the very end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The New Mexico Territory 1881 was a land where wind carried dust the color of rust and the sun hung like a dull coin over hills stripped bare. The chapel at the edge of town was supposed to be a refuge. Today, it felt like a gallows. Grace moved quietly along the side aisle, her cotton dress whispering against the worn pews. She'd come to tidy the altar the same way she did every Saturday. But halfway there, she heard voices near the vestry door, low, deliberate male. She recognized both. "I don't have gold," her father said, voice steady, almost reverent. "But I have a daughter." Grace froze. Clyde Mercer's reply carried the slow, greasy weight of someone savoring every word. "I'll treat her like something precious, so long as she learns her place." Her fingers clenched around the hymn book. She stepped from behind the pulpit, her voice clear and cutting through the incense-heavy air. "What does that mean?" Both men turned. Reverend Whitlock's eyes flickered something between shame and iron. Clyde only tipped his hat with 2 fingers and smirked. "You're selling me," she said. "Do not speak in that tone," her father snapped. "Is it unholy to ask for the truth?" The slap came fast, sharp, echoing against stone walls. Grace staggered back, one hand to her cheek, heat rising where his palm had struck. "Suffering," he said, "is the cost of salvation. You will do your duty as your mother did before you." Her mother. The woman who'd wasted away with secrets on her lips and a ribbon in her hair, never telling Grace why the sorrow in her eyes ran so deep. That night the wind screamed through town like it knew. Lantern light threw long shadows as 2 of Clyde's hired men escorted her to a waiting carriage. Her Sunday dress clung stiff to her skin, starched for a life she didn't want. She carried nothing, not even a goodbye. The wheels creaked forward, the chapel disappeared. Then the town. Then every light. Hours passed in silence, but for the steady clop of hooves. The desert stretched on forever pale under the half-moon. Grace stared at the hunched shape of the driver, the sway of his shoulders, the way the lantern's glow caught the dust in the air. Panic rose like a tide she couldn't stop. Her breath quickened. Her palms slicked. Then she moved. With a cry more animal than human, she threw herself from the carriage. The ground rose up hard, tearing her skirt, grinding gravel into her palms and knees. Pain flared bright and hot. She rolled, tasting dirt and blood. Behind her, the carriage kept going, no shout, no brake, just wheels fading into the dark. She forced herself up. One ankle screamed with each step, but she limped away from the road toward the jagged outline of the hills. Into the trees where moonlight couldn't follow. No food, no water, no map, just the sound of her own breathing ragged and uneven against the vast silence. Hours blurred. The cold seeped deeper. Her legs grew heavy, then numb. Finally, they gave out beneath her. She sank to the ground, her body too dry to sweat, too battered to ache. She didn't remember the moment her eyes closed, only the feel of the earth gritty and unyielding beneath her cheek. Snow was rare in the territory, but it came that night, thin patches clinging to dead leaves and frost-bitten brush. Eli Blackthorne spotted her first as a shadow that didn't belong. He'd been tracking deer along the southern ridge, bow in hand, his steps soundless in the frozen dirt. As he drew closer, he saw the truth. She was no animal. A girl, pale-skinned cheeks flushed with cold lips cracked. Her dress hung in tatters, the hem dark with dried blood. Around her neck, a leather cord held a small bundle of feathers, black-white and one faded red. Eli knelt, brushing them with the back of his hand. The knot, the binding, it was Comanche. Old, sacred, a token that meant returner. He didn't ask how she had it, not yet. He slid his arms beneath her, lifting her with care. She was light, too light, and cold enough to make his own skin prickle. With the quiet precision of someone used to moving unseen, Eli carried her toward the village, the frost crunching under his boots. Above them, the sky was a dark, endless lid, and the first breath of dawn was still hours away. Eli moved quickly, but without haste, the way a man does when every sound carries meaning. The girl in his arms stirred once, a shallow breath escaping her lips before she sank back into unconsciousness. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hair stiff with frost and dust. By the time the village fires came into view, the sky had shifted from black to the deep blue that comes before sunrise. Smoke curled from low lodges built of hide and timber, the scent of cedar and sage riding the cold air. Eli's steps slowed as he approached the largest lodge near the center. A flap lifted before he reached it. Mara stepped out, her long gray hair in two thick braids, her eyes sharp as a hawk's even in the dim light. "What is this?" she asked in Comanche, her voice low. "Found her on the ridge," Eli replied, his breath steady despite the weight in his arms. "She carries a token." Mara's gaze dropped to the feathers at the girl's neck. For a moment something flickered there, recognition, maybe even grief, but it passed quickly. She gestured toward the warmth inside. "Bring her." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of herbs drying overhead. Eli lowered the girl onto a mat of woven reeds and hide. Mara knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her cheek. "She is cold, but the fire will hold her," Mara murmured, switching to English for Eli's sake. "Fetch water." When he returned, Mara was easing the girl's head up, tipping the bowl gently against cracked lips. The girl's throat moved a slow swallow, then another. Her eyelids fluttered open, hazel eyes glassy with exhaustion. "You're safe," Mara said, though she knew safety was a fragile thing. "Drink." The girl's voice came hoarse. "Where am I?" Eli stood by the fire, arms crossed, his shadow stretching long across the lodge floor. "Among people who don't sell daughters," he said. Her gaze shifted toward him, confusion tightening her brow. "You don't even know me." "And yet here you are," he said simply. She turned back to Mara. "I don't have anywhere else." Her fingers trembled as they brushed the feathers at her throat. "I'll work. I'll do whatever you need. I'll give myself if that's the price." The air in the lodge changed. Eli stepped forward, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. "This is not a place where bodies are traded for belonging," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "If you stay, you will work, learn, and heal. Gratitude is not measured in flesh." She blinked at him, something in her shoulders easing, though her eyes still darted, searching. Mara adjusted the blanket over her. "Rest first. Words can wait." The girl didn't argue, her eyes closed again, the exhaustion pulling her under. When Eli stepped back outside, dawn had broken fully. The village was waking children chasing each other between lodges, the smell of rabbit stew rising from cooking pits. He didn't speak of her to the others yet. People here had long memories, and strangers were rarely welcomed without questions. By midday, the girl was sitting up, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Mara set a bowl of thick stew in her lap. She held it awkwardly, as though she'd forgotten what it meant to be offered something without a cost. "Eat," Mara said. The first spoonful made her eyes close briefly, like she was anchoring herself to the warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. "What is your name, Grace?" "Grace Whitlock." Mara studied her a long moment, then nodded once. "Grace, you will help me tend the fire today." Her brows lifted. "I don't know how. Then you will learn." Grace followed Mara outside. The sacred fire burned low in the center of the village, ringed by stones blackened with years of smoke. Mara knelt, showing her how to feed it cedar branches, how to watch the curl of the flames. "Not too much at once," Mara instructed. "The fire breathes like we do. You smother it, it dies." Grace's hands trembled as she placed the wood. Like this, Mara's mouth curved slightly. "Better. Tomorrow you will do it without me." Eli passed by then, carrying a bundle of kindling over one shoulder. He set it down without a word, but his eyes met Grace's, briefly measuring, not judging. She looked away first. By the second day, she was sweeping ash from the fire pit at dawn. By the third, she was helping Mara grind herbs into salve, the scent of wild mint clinging to her fingers. Her palms blistered from the work, but she didn't complain. Still, she noticed the glances. Some lingered too long, some slid away quickly. A few carried the kind of weight that made her skin prickle. One evening, as she left Mara's lodge with a water jar, she found Eli standing just outside. He nodded toward the feathers at her neck. "That token. Where did you get it?" Her hand rose instinctively to touch it. "My mother gave it to me. She never said why." Eli's gaze didn't waver. "Hold on to it. There are things worth keeping even when you don't understand them yet." The fire crackled between them. Grace realized then that in a place where few words were spent carelessly, his were something close to a promise. That night, when she lay down, the village was quiet, except for the wind moving through the trees. For the first time since she'd left the chapel, she didn't feel the weight of footsteps behind her. But morning would bring other eyes, other questions, and not all of them would be kind. The days turned sharper with cold, the kind that crept under hides and settled deep in the joints. Grace woke each morning to the smell of cedar smoke and the low murmur of voices outside Mara's lodge. Her hands were raw from grinding herbs and scraping hides, her back sore from hauling water, but she welcomed the ache. It meant she was still here. That morning, Mara handed her a wooden spoon and nodded toward a clay pot hanging above the fire. "Stir until the steam curls," she said. "Not before, not after." Grace leaned over the bubbling stew, the scent of rabbit and desert herbs filling her lungs. Like this, she asked, careful not to splash. Mara's sharp gaze softened for a heartbeat. Better than yesterday. It was the closest thing to praise she'd had in years. Eli appeared at the lodge's entrance with a bundle of kindling under one arm. He set it down by the fire without a word, but his eyes flicked to the pot, then to Grace. She felt herself straighten under his silent appraisal. Later, while hanging dried sage along the lodge beams, Grace caught Mara humming a tune. It stopped her mid-motion. "My mother used to hum that," she said quietly. "When she worked in the garden." Mara's hand stilled. "What was her name, Amara?" "She had a scar here," Grace said, touching just behind her left ear. "She told me she fell off a pony as a child." Mara's eyes darkened. She was one of us before she was taken, before they gave her a name that fit their books. The air between them felt heavier, and for a moment Grace could only stare at the fire. "She never told me," she whispered. "She just gave me the feather and said someday it would guide me home." She didn't forget, Mara said. She was waiting for the world to remember her. That night, Grace sat by the fire outside, fingers tracing the beadwork on the tunic Mara had given her. The village children played nearby, their laughter carrying in the crisp air. She no longer flinched when they looked her way. She wanted to believe this place could hold her. But acceptance did not come easily. It began quietly, ashes dumped into the water pot, a bitter root burned into her stew. Then the thread she used to mend a child's tunic was cut short, the fabric fraying mid-stitch. She said nothing. Mara said nothing. The next morning, the ruined tunic was mended. That evening, the water jar was full again, cool and clean. A fresh bundle of sage lay near her sleeping mat. She didn't see him do it, but she knew whose hands had left those small salvations. One night after Mara had gone to sleep, Grace sat alone on the dirt floor, arms wrapped around her knees. The fire was low shadows stretching across the lodge walls. She thought of her father's voice in the chapel, of Clyde Mercer's smirk, of all the doors that had closed behind her. Her throat tightened until the tears came, not the sharp gasping kind, but slow and steady, like rain seeping into dry earth. The lodge flap lifted. Eli stepped in without a sound. He crouched by the fire, reaching into the pouch at his side. From it, he pulled a small bundle wrapped in buckskin tied with sinew. He placed it in her hands. Grace hesitated, then unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a fine, dark ash mixed with crushed cedar and a sliver of bone. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice hushed. "Ancestral ash," Eli said. "Given to those who belong to the fire. It carries memory." Her fingers closed around it. "Why? Why give this to me?" Eli's gaze didn't waver. He reached down, drew a single word in the dust beside the fire with one finger. "Because you did not beg, you only asked to do." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. She wanted to ask what that meant to him, but she understood enough. In the mornings that followed, she joined the children in their language lessons. She stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, her tongue heavy, but the children laughed with her, not at her. When she finally pronounced a word right, they cheered as if she'd split the sky. It was during one of these lessons that the shout came from the riverbank. Grace looked up in time to see a small boy no more than 5 tumble into the current. The water was swollen from last night's rain, cold and fast. She didn't think she ran. The river slapped her skirt heavy against her legs, pulled at her with icy fingers. She lunged forward, catching the boy's collar just as he disappeared under the surface. Her arms burned as she hauled him back, lungs screaming for air. They collapsed together on the muddy bank, coughing, shivering. The village gathered, but said nothing. They only watched as Mara wrapped the boy in a blanket and led him away. That night, Grace found a small clay bowl near her fire. Inside were ripe berries, their sweetness untouched. She stared at them for a long time before eating the first one. The next morning, Mara handed her a shawl woven from soft wool dyed with crushed roots stitched with simple red patterns. "A thank you," the old woman said. Grace didn't ask from whom it had come, but something had shifted in the way the older women nodded when she passed, in the way the children reached for her hand, in the way Eli lingered a moment longer near the fire before leaving. And for the first time since she'd fallen to the desert floor under that twisted cedar, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this place was willing to keep her. The snow melted in thin ribbons along the edges of the stream, leaving behind dark soil and the smell of wet earth. Spring in the territory didn't come with gentle warmth. It came in quick bursts between cold winds, a reminder that nothing here softened easily. Grace was learning that truth in more ways than one. She had begun to rise before the village fully woke, tending the fire as Mara had shown her, whispering the old words she still struggled to pronounce. The cedar smoke clung to her hair and clothes as if it meant to claim her. One morning as she fed the flames, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Eli standing there, a leather bundle in his hands. He didn't speak until he was close enough for the firelight to catch the planes of his face. "This is for you," he said, offering the bundle. Grace wiped her hands on her skirt before taking it. The leather was worn soft with age. She untied the cord and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a bracelet, braided leather, its center holding a single carved bead etched with careful lines. "What does it mean?" she asked. Running her thumb over the design, Eli's gaze held hers. "Naya, the one who begins again." Her throat tightened. "Is that me?" "If you choose it," he said simply. She looked down at the bracelet, then back at him. "If I am the beginning," she murmured, "then you are where I begin." His expression didn't change, but the silence between them felt different, weighted, certain. He gave a single nod and stepped back, leaving her by the fire with the bracelet warm in her palm. In the days that followed, she noticed more changes. Conversations didn't fall silent when she approached. Children came to her with questions in halting English or shy Comanche, tugging her sleeves to join their games. Even the older women, once so guarded, began to ask her to help with tasks beyond the fire, sorting seeds, weaving mats, grinding corn. But just as she began to feel the threads of belonging weaving around her, the horizon darkened. It was late afternoon when the first dust cloud appeared beyond the ridge. The air turned heavy the way it did before a storm. Grace stood outside Mara's lodge, squinting into the distance. It didn't take long to make out the shapes: horses, 5 or 6 riders hunched in the saddle. Her breath caught when the lead rider came into focus. Clyde Mercer. His silver belt buckle caught the light like a flash of warning. Children scattered. Women pulled them close. Warriors stepped into the open boughs and spears in hand. No one shouted. No one moved without purpose. Clyde dismounted with deliberate slowness, boots crunching on dry earth. His eyes found her immediately. "There she is," he said loud enough for the whole village to hear. "My runaway dove." Grace didn't step back. She straightened her hands, curling into fists at her sides. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice steady. "I paid for you, girl," Clyde replied, smirking. "You ran off like some outlaw bride, and now you think hiding here changes that. You paid for silence. You paid for obedience. I wasn't yours then, and I'm not yours now." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He turned toward the gathered warriors. "You think this little camp can stand against the law? I've got men with more bullets than you have arrows. Hand her over, or I burn this place to the ground." Before Grace could speak, Eli stepped forward. He didn't draw his weapon, but lifted his spear in a deliberate arc, not in threat, but in declaration. One by one, other warriors came to stand beside him, forming a line between her and Clyde. Then Mara walked forward, something wrapped in cloth cradled in her hands. She stopped a few paces from Clyde and unwrapped it. In her palms lay a beaded bracelet worn with age, the colors faded but still rich. "This belonged to her mother," Mara said, her voice cutting clean through the standoff. "A daughter of our people taken long ago. This one carries her blood, her name, her place." Clyde's eyes flicked from the bracelet to Grace, then to the silent wall of warriors. The wind kicked up dust between them. He adjusted his hat, spat once, and without another word mounted his horse. His men followed, their silence louder than any curse. Only when they disappeared beyond the ridge did Eli lower his spear. Grace's knees felt suddenly weak, but she didn't move until Mara stepped to her side and pressed the bracelet into her palm. "You are not theirs," the old woman said softly. "You were never meant to be." Grace closed her fingers around it, and for the first time since she'd stepped out of the chapel's shadow, she let herself believe it. The village did not celebrate Clyde's retreat. They simply returned to what they had been doing before the dust cloud appeared, as though acknowledging the danger would invite it back. But Grace felt the shift subtle, like the warmth from embers that had been buried under ash. Eyes lingered on her longer now, not with suspicion, but with a quiet acknowledgement she hadn't known she craved. That night she sat outside Mara's lodge, the bracelet from her mother in one hand and the one Eli had given her in the other. The fire's glow painted the lines of the beads in gold and shadow. She turned them slowly, feeling the weight of what they meant, not just to her, but to the people who had stood between her and the man who claimed to own her. Mara came to sit beside her, lowering herself carefully onto the worn log. "The land remembers even when we forget," she said, eyes fixed on the fire. Grace glanced at her. "Do you think they'll come back?" "Men like him always do," Mara replied. "But he knows now he'll not take you without walking through all of us, and that is a road he will not survive." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crackle of the wood. The wind carried the faint sound of a drum from somewhere across the village, a slow, steady beat like a heartbeat. The next morning the air was clear, the sky wide and pale. Grace rose before dawn, tending the sacred fire. She had begun to whisper the old words under her breath, stumbling less over the syllables. When the first light touched the tops of the trees, Mara joined her, carrying a folded shawl dyed deep red and black. "Today is the naming day," Mara said. Grace blinked. "For who?" "For you." The word struck her like a bell. She set down the bundle of cedar she'd been holding. "I don't understand." Mara's eyes softened. "Names are not only given at birth, some are earned." She placed a hand over Grace's heart. "You have walked through fire, and it has not burned you. It has shaped you." By mid-morning, the village gathered in a wide circle around the sacred fire. Each person carried something small, a feather, a carved bead, a smooth stone to lay beside the flames. Grace stood at the edge, her hands steady, though her breath fluttered in her chest. She wore a tunic sewn by Mara's hands dyed in ochre and ash, and around her neck hung both bracelets. Mara stepped forward, her voice carrying over the hush. "Today we speak a name not born of blood alone, but of the journey, of pain endured, of truth claimed. From this day you are Naya, the one who begins again." A murmur swept through the circle, not with doubt, but recognition. Mara draped the firekeeper's shawl across her shoulders, tying the knot so it rested over her heart. The boy she had pulled from the river ran forward, offering her a scrap of bark etched with symbols she had taught him to write. Naya knelt, took it gently, and whispered her thanks. His grin was wide enough to break the morning chill. That night Naya sat by the central hearth. The fire burned low, not from neglect but intention. She leaned forward, sprinkling cedar ash onto the coals. Sparks leapt into the air, and the villagers watched them rise like spirits answering a call. In the days that followed, her place in the village settled like roots finding water. She woke before the sun tended the fire and taught the children words in both English and Comanche. She told them stories not just of her life before, but of the land, the river, the wind. Eli was often nearby, sometimes sharpening tools, sometimes silent in the background. He never interrupted, but she could feel his attention steady and unwavering. One evening, as the sky shifted from gold to deep violet, he approached while she was grinding corn. Naya, he said, tasting the name as though testing its weight. She looked up, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. Still getting used to hearing it. It suits you. They stood in the quiet, the rhythm of the grinding stone between them. She wanted to say something more to bridge the distance that still lay between them, despite everything. But the moment passed when Mara called her from across the fire. The drumbeat that night was faster, livelier. The air felt lighter, but Naya couldn't shake the awareness that Clyde's shadow still hung somewhere beyond the ridge. She had begun again. Yes, but beginnings were fragile things, and she knew the world had a way of testing them. The days after her naming settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Naya would rise before the first light broke over the hills, slip quietly from her mat, and tend the sacred fire while the village still lay under blankets and dreams. The flames had a way of speaking if she listened long enough, the pop of resin, the sigh of cedar, the hush of smoke curling into the dawn. Children were the first to find her in the mornings. They came in pairs or clusters, bringing with them pebbles, feathers, or scraps of bark for her to weave into the day's lessons. She taught them English words. They taught her Comanche ones, laughter filling the spaces where her tongue still tripped over certain sounds. One morning, as the frost burned off the grass, Eli appeared with a bucket of water balanced on one shoulder. He set it down by the fire, his gaze flicking toward the children clustered around Naya. "They're loud today," he remarked. "They're learning," she replied, wiping her hands on her skirt. He crouched near the flames, feeding them a split log. "And you?" Her smile was small, but it lingered. "I'm trying." He gave a quiet grunt of approval before standing and disappearing toward the river. She watched him go, her chest tightening in a way she didn't fully understand. By midday, the village was alive with workmen returning from the hunt with rabbits slung over their shoulders, women pounding maize smoke rising in thin streams from each lodge. Naya had begun to move through it all without drawing stares. She was no longer the outsider skulking at the edges, but someone with tasks to finish, places to be. It was during one of these afternoons, while helping Mara hang strips of drying meat, that Naya noticed the change in the air. It wasn't the weather, it was the silence. A stillness settled over the village, the kind that meant every ear was listening for the same thing. Mara's eyes cut toward the ridge. "Riders," she said. Naya felt her stomach drop. A lone figure appeared first, not Clyde, but a young man she didn't recognize. He wore a dust-streaked coat and carried no weapon in hand, but the set of his shoulders carried warning. Behind him, a second rider followed, older, his face drawn tight against the cold wind. The warriors moved forward, forming a half circle between the strangers and the heart of the village. Eli was among them, his spear resting lightly in his grip. The younger rider lifted a hand in greeting. "We're looking for someone," he called in accented English. His eyes swept the gathered faces before landing on her. Naya stepped closer to Mara, who placed a steadying hand on her arm. "What do you want?" Eli's voice carried across the space, calm but edged. "She's wanted in town," the man said, jerking his chin toward Naya. "Claims against her property, taken, debts unpaid." "That's a lie," Naya said before she could stop herself. The older man's gaze was cold. "You ran from Reverend Whitlock's house without settling your obligations. The man wants what's his." "I'm not his." She shot back the words louder than she meant. Eli's spear tip lowered, not in threat, but in warning. "You've come far to repeat another man's lies. Turn back." The young rider hesitated. His companion muttered something under his breath before tugging his reins. They rode off without another word, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. The warriors didn't relax until the last speck of dust was gone from sight. Eli turned to Naya, his expression unreadable. "They'll keep trying." She swallowed hard. "I know." That night she found herself sitting by the fire longer than usual, the glow painting her hands in gold. Eli came to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his shoulder. "When I first came here," she said quietly, "I thought all I had to do was survive. I didn't think about what it would mean if someone tried to take me back." "You're not going back," Eli said. She looked at him, searching his face for certainty. "How can you be so sure?" His eyes met hers, steady as the earth. "Because you're not alone anymore." The words settled over her like the shawl Mara had tied around her on naming day, warm, heavy with meaning. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The fire popped, sending a plume of sparks into the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled low and mournful.
And though the village slept, Naya knew the quiet was only the pause before the next test came riding over the ridge.
3 nights passed after the riders left, and though no further sign of them came, the unease they'd brought with them lingered like smoke after a fire. Naya felt it in the way conversations trailed off when she passed in the extra spears leaning against the lodge walls, in the way Mara kept her closer than usual during the day. Even the children, usually unafraid to tug at her sleeve, seemed to study her a moment longer before rushing forward with their questions. The morning after the full moon, she woke to the sound of pounding feet outside. Stepping into the cold air, she found Eli already moving toward the edge of the village, his spear in hand. "What is it?" she called. "Tracks," he said without slowing. "Too close." She followed despite the knot tightening in her chest. The tracks were fresh in the damp soil beyond the ridge, 2 horses heavy-set, the prints cutting deep. Eli crouched, tracing one with his fingers. "They were here before dawn," he said, watching. Naya shivered, not from the wind. "They're waiting for a chance." He straightened, his expression grim. "Then we don't give them one." Back in the village, Mara was already at the fire, her hands moving fast over the grinding stone. "You will stay close today," she told Naya without looking up. "There's work enough here." Naya didn't argue. She spent the morning helping prepare hides for tanning, the smell of smoke and damp fur clinging to her hands. Yet her mind wandered, drawn again and again to the thought of eyes in the dark, watching from just beyond the ridge. Near midday, as she was carrying a bundle of dried herbs from Mara's lodge, she nearly collided with Eli. He caught her arm to steady her. "You're jumpy," he said. "Maybe because someone's out there waiting to drag me back to the place I barely escaped?" She replied sharper than she intended. His grip loosened, but his gaze held hers. "You're not alone in this. Remember that." She wanted to believe it, wanted to let the weight of those words settle her heartbeat, but she also knew how quickly a promise could be broken by the pull of the past. That evening, the council gathered around the central fire. Eli stood with the warriors, his voice low, as he spoke in Comanche, the words quick and clipped. Mara joined in at times, her tone steady but edged. Naya didn't understand all of it, but she caught her own name more than once, and each time it made her skin prickle. When the meeting broke, Eli came to her. "They'll post guards along the ridge for the next few nights," he said. "If they come, we'll see them first." "And if they come in the day?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Then they'll learn this place is not so easy to walk into." The firelight carved his features in gold and shadow, and for a moment she felt the same certainty she'd heard in his voice before. But it was quickly replaced by the memory of Clyde's smirk in the chapel, of his hand reaching for her as if she were no more than property. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on her mat, listening to the wind shift against the lodge walls, the faint crunch of footsteps outside as the guards made their rounds. Sometime past midnight, she rose and stepped into the cold air. Eli was there, leaning on his spear, his gaze fixed on the dark ridge beyond. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning. "So should you." He glanced at her, then one corner of his mouth twitching. "I sleep when I can. Tonight isn't one of those nights." She moved to stand beside him, the silence stretching between them, filled only by the distant rustle of the trees. "Do you ever get tired of watching for what might come?" she asked quietly. His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Getting tired is how people get taken. You keep watch, or you lose what matters." She thought of her mother, of the feather necklace, of the way Mara had said she was waiting for the world to remember her. Maybe she had been taken because there was no one to keep watch for her. The wind carried the faint sound of hooves, and both of them froze. Eli lifted a hand, signaling toward the shadows where another guard stood. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, but the tightness in Naya's chest remained. When they returned to the lodge, the fire inside had burned low. Mara stirred, lifting her head. "Nothing." "Nothing," Eli said, but his tone carried the weight of a man who knew it was only a matter of time. Naya lay back down, staring into the dim orange glow of the embers. Sleep came in fits, chased by dreams where she was running again, her feet sinking into deep sand, voices calling her back into the dark. And somewhere beyond the ridge, someone was waiting for the moment her guard slipped. The next day broke under a sky the color of worn steel. The sun barely pierced the thin veil of cloud, and the air felt heavy as if holding its breath. Naya moved through the village with quiet purpose, but her eyes kept straying toward the ridge. Every shadow beyond it seemed deeper, every shift of wind like a whisper carrying a warning. Mara sent her to gather willow bark near the stream. Eli insisted on going with her, though he didn't say why. He walked a few paces behind, scanning the tree line, the bow slung across his back, and his movements as measured as the current of the water beside them. "You think they're close," she said over her shoulder. "I know they're close," he replied. "Tracks don't lie." Naya crouched by the bank, peeling strips of bark into her basket. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Eli stopped beside her, his shadow falling across the basket. "Then face what's chasing you. That's the only way it stops." She looked up at him, her hands stilling. "It's not just me they'd hurt. If they come here, they'll find more than they bargained for," he interrupted. But his eyes softened. "This place isn't unprotected. Neither are you." They returned before midday, the basket full, but the knot in Naya's stomach tighter than before. The village felt different when they stepped back into it, quieter, watchful. A boy ran past them shouting something in Comanche that she couldn't quite catch, and moments later 2 of the warriors jogged toward the ridge. Mara met them at the fire. Scouts spotted movement west of the trail, she told Eli. 3 riders. His expression hardened. Not Clyde. "They didn't get close enough to see," Mara said. "But they'll be back. The wind's in their favor." That night the guard posts doubled. Fires were kept low so the light wouldn't carry far. Naya stayed in Mara's lodge, trying to focus on sorting herbs, but her ears caught every footstep outside, every creak of leather, every murmur in the dark. Sometime past midnight, Eli entered his boots, leaving faint prints on the packed dirt floor. "It's quiet," he said, though his tone didn't carry relief. Naya straightened from her work. Quiet doesn't always mean safe. He glanced toward the flap. "No, it means they're patient." Before she could answer, a sharp whistle split the night air, a signal from the ridge. Eli was already moving his hand, closing briefly over her shoulder as he passed. "Stay here." She ignored the command and followed him out into the cold. The warriors were gathered in a tight line, their attention fixed on the darkness beyond the ridge. Shapes moved their horses' shifting breath steaming in the frigid air. One rider urged forward just enough for the pale light of the moon to catch his face. Clyde Mercer. His smirk was as sharp as she remembered. "Well, there's the runaway dove," he called. "Thought you'd hide forever." Naya's pulse hammered, but she stepped forward until she was beside Eli. "I'm not hiding," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. Clyde chuckled low. "No. Looks like you've made yourself a nice little nest." Shame about the company. His gaze slid over the warriors. "They can't keep you." "Not from me." "You'll have to come through them to try," Eli said, his voice calm but threaded with steel. Clyde leaned in his saddle. "Oh, I intend to, but not tonight." He tipped his hat to Naya. "Sweet dreams." With a tug on the reins, he wheeled his horse and rode back into the darkness, his men following. The line of warriors held their ground until the sound of hooves faded. Only then did Eli lower his spear. "He's testing us," he said quietly. Mara stepped to Naya's side, her voice low but firm. "They won't tire as quickly as you want them to, and neither can you." Back inside the lodge, Naya sank to her mat, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her. She could still hear Clyde's voice, smooth and certain, as if the years she'd fought to reclaim herself meant nothing. Eli lingered in the doorway. "You kept your ground tonight," he said. "That matters." She looked up at him, her fingers curling around the shawl Mara had given her on naming day. "Standing still doesn't mean I'm safe." "No," he agreed, "but it means you're ready." The flap closed softly behind him, leaving Naya in the low glow of the fire, her thoughts restless. She knew Clyde wasn't done, and neither was she. By morning, the snow that had dusted the ridge was gone, melted into the soil like it had never been there. But the memory of Clyde's smirk lingered coiled tight in Naya's chest. She moved through the village with her shoulders squared, refusing to let the unease show, yet every sound beyond the tree line caught her attention. Mara sent her to grind maize that day, and the steady rhythm of the stone was almost enough to quiet her thoughts. Almost. She was halfway through the task when Eli's shadow fell over her. "They're gone from the ridge," he said. She paused, meeting his gaze. For how long, he didn't answer right away. "Long enough for us to prepare." The word prepare sat heavy between them. She pushed the stone in another slow circle. You think they'll come again soon? They didn't ride out here just to turn back, Eli replied. Men like him come with a purpose, and they don't leave without taking what they think belongs to them. Her hand stilled on the stone. I'm not his. His voice was steady. We know that. Now we make sure he knows it's not just words. That afternoon, Eli gathered the warriors by the central fire. Naya stood at the edge of the circle, listening as he spoke in Comanche, the words flowing quick but clear. Occasionally a head would nod, a grip would tighten on a spear. Mara spoke too, her voice lower but carrying the weight of someone who'd seen many winters and many threats. When the meeting ended, Eli walked with her toward the stream. If he comes again, we won't meet him at the ridge. We'll wait for him here. She frowned. Why not stop him before he reaches the village? Because he wants to see fear in your eyes, Eli said. If you're standing here with us behind you, he won't find it. The certainty in his tone steadied something inside her. She nodded once more to herself, then to him. The next days were a quiet storm of preparation. Traps were set along the outer trails, signal points marked where a single whistle could summon half the village. Naya trained with Mara on knife work, short, deliberate movements not meant for show. Her hands ached from the practice, but she didn't stop. One evening, while the fire crackled low, she asked Mara, when my mother was here before they took her, would she have stood like this? Mara's gaze softened, though her answer came without hesitation. She would have stood exactly like this, and she would have expected you to do the same. It was near sunset on the third day when the lookout's whistles split the air. The sound was sharp, urgent, echoing down from the ridge. Naya was already moving before she thought about it, the shawl Mara had given her wrapped tight around her shoulders. Eli was ahead of her, spear in hand, his pace steady, not hurried. When they reached the edge of the village, the riders were already in sight. Clyde at their head, 4 men behind him. They didn't charge. They approached slow, like they were stepping into familiar territory. Clyde's eyes found her instantly. You've been busy, he called out, glancing at the line of warriors forming behind Eli. Looks like you've convinced a whole camp to die for you. No one dies for me, Naya said, stepping forward. They stand with me. He laughed under his breath, the sound carrying just enough to sting. Same difference, girl. Now, you can come back with me, quiet, or what you cut in. You burn this place, kill people you don't know, just to prove you own what you never had. His smirk faltered for the briefest moment. Careful, you're speaking like someone who thinks the world listens. Eli's voice came from just behind her. We're listening. One of Clyde's men shifted in his saddle. The tension between the two lines was a taut wire ready to snap. Naya held Clyde's gaze and didn't look away. The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of leather and the restless shuffle of hooves. Finally, Clyde clicked his tongue and pulled on the reins. Enjoy your borrowed time, he said, turning his horse. We'll talk again. The riders wheeled away, the sound of their departure swallowed by the wind. The warriors didn't move until the last hoofbeat faded. Eli stepped up beside her. You didn't flinch. I couldn't, she said. Mara joined them, her eyes scanning the ridge. He's measuring you, she told Naya. The more you stand, the less he has to measure. The fire in Naya's chest burned hotter than the one in the hearth that night. Clyde wasn't gone. Not truly, but something had shifted. The next time he came, she would be ready to meet him, not as the girl who had fled into the dark, but as the woman who had chosen where she would stand. The days after Clyde's retreat passed with an uneasy stillness, the kind that made the air feel too thin, too fragile. The ridge looked quiet, but quiet no longer meant safety to Naya. She had learned to watch the way Eli did, not just the horizon, but the birds in the trees, the way they scattered or stayed, the shift of the wind as it carried scents and sounds from far away. Mara kept her busy. The older woman said little about Clyde or the riders, but her hands moved faster over the work, and she passed down more lessons than usual: how to pack dried meat for a journey, how to bind a wound to keep it clean for days. You teach like we're leaving, Naya said one afternoon, working a strip of rawhide between her fingers. I teach like you need to be ready, Mara replied without looking up. That's never wasted. The truth of it sat heavy in Naya's chest. Readiness was no longer a word, it was a state she had to wear like skin. That evening, while the sun bled into the horizon, Eli found her by the fire. He was carrying a bow instead of his usual spear, a quiver slung over his back. "Walk with me," he said. They moved beyond the outer lodges, following a narrow path that cut through scrub and stone until the village was hidden from view. When they reached a low rise, he stopped scanning the ridgeline. "Tracks again," he murmured. "Not close, but fresh. 3, maybe 4 horses." "They keep circling." Naya's fingers tightened around the shawl at her shoulders. "Why keep circling if they don't intend to come in?" "To make us restless," he said. "Tired. More likely to make mistakes." He glanced at her. "He knows what he's doing." "And so do you," she said. Eli's gaze lingered on hers, steady but unreadable. "The next time there won't be words first." The weight of that settled between them, unspoken but understood. They walked back in silence, the sound of their boots crunching over frost-hardened earth, the only reminder of how close the cold season was drawing. The following morning, a thin layer of snow covered the ground, bright enough to make the air seem sharper. Naya was sweeping ash from the sacred fire when one of the lookouts came running down from the ridge, his breath clouding in front of him. He spoke quickly to Eli in Comanche, and though she couldn't understand every word, she knew enough from Eli's face. "They're coming," Eli told Mara, who had stepped out of her lodge. 5 riders, Clyde among them. The village moved without panic, each person falling into a role. Children were led to the central lodge, the elders gathering near them. Warriors took up positions, not charging out to meet the riders, but holding the ground inside the heart of the camp. Naya stood by the sacred fire, the shawl tied tight, the bracelets heavy on her wrists. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, but her feet stayed planted. When Clyde rode in his horse's breath steaming in the cold air, his eyes went straight to her. "Still here," he said with a crooked smile. "I'll give you that." "You came a long way for nothing," she replied. He tilted his head. "Not nothing. I came to see if you'd finally remembered who you belonged to. I belong to no one." His smile thinned and he swung down from his horse. The men behind him followed the crunch of boots on snow, unnervingly slow. Eli stepped forward, placing himself between Clyde and Naya. "You don't take another step." Clyde's eyes flicked over the line of warriors. "You think this wall of bodies changes the law?" "She's mine, and no one here can change that." Mara moved up beside Eli, holding something wrapped in leather. "The law you speak of is not the only law," she said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal the beaded bracelet Naya had seen before, the one that had belonged to her mother. "She carries the blood of our people. Her place is here." Clyde's gaze dropped to the bracelet, then back to Naya. For a moment his smirk faltered. The tension around the fire stretched tight, ready to break. "You walk away now," Eli said, his voice low but carrying. "Or you don't walk away at all." Clyde studied him for a long beat, the cold air between them sharp enough to cut. Finally, he stepped back toward his horse. "This isn't over," he said, swinging into the saddle. "It's over when you stop coming," Naya replied. His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. With a sharp pull on the reins, he turned his horse and rode out his men, following close behind. Only when the last rider disappeared beyond the ridge did the warriors lower their weapons. Naya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the cold burning in her lungs. Eli turned to her. "You didn't just stand your ground today, you claimed it." She met his gaze, the heat in her chest warming against the winter air. "I think I finally know what that means." The snow stayed on the ground that week, clinging to the edges of the lodges and turning the paths between them into slick ribbons of mud and ice. The sky was a pale, unbroken gray, and the cold seemed to settle into the bones of the village. Still, life went on. Fires tended hides, scraped children chasing each other in bursts of laughter that seemed too bright for the season. Naya moved among them with a steadiness she hadn't felt in months. Clyde's latest retreat hadn't lulled her into believing he was gone for good, but something in the way he'd looked at her, the flicker in his eyes when Mara showed him the bracelet, had shifted the ground beneath them. One evening, as she helped Mara prepare a pot of stew, the old woman glanced at her. "You carry yourself differently now." Naya shrugged, though she felt the truth of it. "I stood my ground because everyone stood with me. Maybe Mara said stirring the pot, or maybe they stood with you because you were already standing." The words sat in her chest long after the stew was eaten and the fire burned low. Later that night, she stepped outside for air. The sky was clear for the first time in days, and the stars looked sharp enough to cut. Eli was there at the edge of the firelight, his spear leaning against one shoulder. "You're keeping watch again," she said. He looked over at her. "Always." She walked toward him, her breath clouding in the cold. "Do you think he'll come back before the thawmen like Clyde don't care about weather?" Eli replied. "They care about timing. If he thinks we're weaker in the cold, he'll try." Her gaze drifted toward the dark ridge. "And if he comes while I'm alone?" "Then you fight," Eli said simply. "And you hold until we're there." The bluntness of it made her draw a sharp breath, but there was no fear in his tone, only certainty. In the days that followed, she took his words to heart. She trained harder with Mara's knives, learning how to move with purpose, not panic. She practiced her footing on the icy ground, how to pivot and strike without losing balance. Eli tested her grip, her reflexes never easing the pressure. "You're faster when you stop thinking about what might happen," he told her one afternoon. She wiped sweat from her brow. "Hard to forget when the past keeps chasing you." "You're not being chased anymore," Eli said, tossing her a short spear. "You're being measured." The phrase stuck with her. Measured. She wondered how many people in her life had done that before her father Clyde, strangers in town, testing her worth, her limits, her will. The difference now was that she wasn't shrinking under it. One morning, just before dawn, the lookout's whistle broke through the stillness. Naya grabbed her shawl and stepped outside, heart pounding, only to find Eli approaching with calm steps. "It's not them," he said quickly, a lone rider coming slow. The village gathered cautiously as the rider approached. He was older, his coat worn, his hat pulled low. When he dismounted, he held his hands away from his sides, showing he carried no weapon. "I come from the trading post," he said, in a voice made rough by the cold. "Clyde Mercer's been there, talking loud, looking for someone named Naya." Mara's hand found Naya's shoulder, steady but firm. "What did he say? That he'll make one last visit before the season turns?" the man replied. "And he means to leave with what he came for." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Why warn us?" The man shrugged. "I don't care for Mercer's kind. Figured you'd want to know." He mounted again and rode off without waiting for thanks. The circle around the fire broke slowly. There were no hurried plans, no panic, only a tightening of the quiet. Naya felt it settle into her bones like the cold, the knowledge that the next time Clyde crossed that ridge, there would be no retreat for either of them. That night she found Eli sharpening his spear. "You believe him?" she said. "I do." "Then we prepare," she told him. His gaze lifted to hers, and for a long moment they stood in the glow of the fire, the unspoken agreement passing between them, as sure as the heat on their faces. The ridge loomed dark against the starlit sky, and somewhere beyond it, Clyde Mercer was already deciding how this would end. The days before the thaw felt heavier than winter itself. The snow softened in patches under the pale sun, revealing dark soil beneath, but the air still held a chill sharp enough to bite the skin. Each dawn brought the same question: would today be the day Clyde rode over the ridge? The village moved as though under a silent pact. Spears and bows stayed within arm's reach. Meat was dried and stored. The children knew to stay near the central lodges. No one said Clyde's name, but his shadow was in every glance toward the horizon. On the fourth morning after the trader's warning, Naya rose before the others. She wrapped the firekeeper's shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the blue-gray light. The sacred fire burned low but steady. She knelt to feed its cedar, whispering the words Mara had taught her, the ones that tasted of both prayer and defiance. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned to find Eli, his breath clouding in the cold. "They're coming," he said. "How many enough?" The word landed heavy, but she stood tightening the knot of the shawl. "Then we're ready." By the time Clyde's riders appeared on the ridge, the village was in position. Warriors formed a line before the sacred fire, elders and children gathered behind them. Mara stood at Naya's side, her face carved with calm. Clyde rode at the front silver belt buckle, catching the weak sunlight. His smirk was exactly as she remembered it from the chapel, as if no miles, no months, no defiance could change what he thought he owned. He reined in just short of the warriors. "Last chance, girl," he called. "You come with me now, and no one here gets hurt." Naya stepped forward until she stood in the open space between the lines. No Clyde.
This ends here. His jaw tightened, the smirk slipping into something colder. You think these people can save you? You think they'll die for you? They don't have to die for me, she said. They stand with me.
Clyde swung down from his horse boots, crunching on the frozen earth. You were nothing before I took you in. You'd be nothing now if I hadn't. You didn't take me in, Naya shot back. You tried to break me, but I'm not yours and I never was. Eli's voice came from the line behind her, steady and sharp. You've stepped far enough. Clyde glanced at him, then at Mara, then back to Naya. You really think standing here changes anything? Mara stepped forward, lifting the beaded bracelet that had belonged to Naya's mother. Her voice carried low and strong. This is her blood, her name, her place. No law of yours will take that away. For the first time, Clyde's eyes wavered. The warriors shifted spears, rising a fraction. The air was a drawn bowstring. Eli moved to stand beside Naya, his presence solid grounding. Leave now, Mercer, or you won't leave at all. The moment stretched until it seemed the cold itself might crack. Then Clyde spat into the dirt, turned, and swung onto his horse. You'll regret this, he said, but there was no conviction in it. He jerked his reins and his men followed him over the ridge without looking back. Silence held for a long time after they were gone, broken only by the low hiss of the fire. Then Mara placed the bracelet into Naya's hand. You are not theirs, she said softly. You never were. Naya closed her fingers around it, the beads warm from Mara's palm. The tightness in her chest eased, not because the danger was gone, but because she had faced it and still stood. That night the village gathered around the sacred fire. The drums beat slow, the songs carried in both tongues. Children danced between the shadows, elders nodded in quiet approval, and the flames threw light high into the dark. Eli found her by the fire's edge. You didn't just hold your ground today, he said. You claimed it. She looked up at him, the firelight catching in her eyes. I think I finally know where I belong. And he asked. She smiled, small but certain. Here, with all of you. With you. He didn't smile back, but the warmth in his gaze was enough. Then we're home. The fire burned bright against the cold night, and above them the stars seemed closer than they'd ever been. Naya stood there with the bracelet at her wrist, the shawl over her shoulders, and the knowledge that this circle, this flame, these people was hers now. And no one would ever take it from her.